We're just discussing the whole three-headed monster situation in between the pipes. What's your best guess on how this breaks down for the Maple Leafs for the next little while here?
In terms of how this looks for the Maple Leafs moving forward, I think there's a lot of things in flux. I think there's a bunch of different holes to fill. I think there's a general manager in Brad Treliving that's motivated to fill them, but he's also dealing at the deadline basically with one hand tied behind his back in terms of the available assets to move to fill all those holes at once. Do you try a scattershot approach and try and dink and dunk and try and do them one at a time? Is it a bigger package if you're trading that first round pick? I tend to believe, and this is my own personal opinion, that if the Leafs end up trading that first round pick this time around, that the only way that they do that is if they're filling multiple holes at once.
Okay, so with that said, do you see them still being in on a player like Chris Tanev? And would that first rounder be for that player or be that plus?
I think they're kind of limited on the Tanev market, Stewie. I think when you look at what Tanev should realistically go for, I mean, the Flames are holding out for a first round pick. They're trying to get there. I think they're wondering if the Leafs are one of those teams that will ultimately bite at the end of the day and say yes. I don't know that they will get there where he is with his game at this stage. And also, is he likely to re-sign in Toronto? And maybe he would since he's from here, but he's not in the position in his career to take a Mark Giordano type deal, given that he's got some prime earning years left and that he hasn't banked the same kind of coin that Giordano has. And frankly, they're not the same age. So I think that's also part of the consideration as well when you consider where the Leafs are at. But that's certainly what Calgary is hoping to do and land. I just don't know what else you'd package up with it in order to make that happen.
Frank, you're very tapped in. Is it an accurate assessment if things are rather quiet on the trade front around the league? And if so, why is that the case in your opinion?
Well, I can't really remember any trade deadline period quite like this one. We're 25 days out from the last trade in the league. I know you keep putting out the tweet. It feels like every night someone make a trade. 25 days. I mean, I look back on deadlines past, we don't typically go more than a week at this time of year without one. And my read on that, just from talking to managers around the league, is that a lot of them think that this market is really kind of thin. There's only a small handful of difference makers. And then after that, you're talking about beauty being in the eye of the beholder. Is this guy the perfect chemistry fit? Is he the perfect positional fit, or does he do what we lack? Does he bring something to the table, a different element that our team doesn't have? And so I think that's part of the consideration as well, that, always at this time of year, kiss of death. But I don't even know anything of today right now that's front burner that would change that scenario.
Well, you've alluded to Brad Treliving's approach, maybe taking that long-term approach at the deadline. But to these 7 games where they've shown that they probably can be a contender, is he going to maybe try to speed that up and add a little more, or he's going to have a long view with this team roster makeup going forward?
I do think it answered some questions for me. I can't say about Brad Treliving specifically. I felt like the Morgan Riley suspension was such a pivotal part of this season. This defense core is already thin. I mentioned before that I think they're multiple pieces away on the blue line from really being in that inner circle of contending teams. But the hard part is, are you willing to let this season slip by when you're getting a 70-plus goal season from Austin Matthews and he's not even the leading scorer of your team? And you've got all these resources and salary cap space committed to these players at the top of your depth chart that are in the absolute prime of their career. It's a really tough dance right now and tightrope for the Leafs to walk. I don't personally know what the right answer is. The other part that I think you have to keep in mind is that there's also really in this year that's been sort of up and down for the Leafs, there's no tangible playoff success that you can hang your hat on. And after different regime, of course, but after going for it and being so aggressive the last few years, can you continue to to push your chips in? Can you continue to spend future assets? And if so, when you do so, are you effectively cutting off years on the back end of what they've been building towards because you don't have anyone in your pipeline? Well, you've got some nice pieces that you're not willing to trade, the Easton Cowens, et cetera. But at some point, you need to restock and replenish. And I think they're asking themselves some pretty significant questions about that amid what I just said with a thin market.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me because I mean, outside of Tanev, who I think could be a difference maker in the long run, at least in the postseason for this team, I just don't see somebody who would make a lot of sense. Who are some of the other names that have been attached, connected to the Maple Leafs over the last little while?
Honestly, I think Brad Treliving is someone that makes calls on so many people and so many players around the league that it'd be unfair to attach really any other significant names to this team. And part of the reason for that is I'm not sure in terms of significant interest, really how much they've had, or I should say authentic interest. It's one thing to call and ask. It's another thing to, put an offer on the table or something like that. And I don't have any other names right now at the top of my list that when you're talking about filling out your bottom six and also attacking your team from a defense perspective, I'm sure they've monitored the Scott Lawton, Sean Walker, Nick Seeler territory, but is there something there to pull off in terms of a bigger, larger package? Maybe, but short of that, I think that's probably it.
I know it's probably way too early to address this, but again, we are in this Toronto market. What are the long-term perspectives for Domi and Bertuzzi with this Leafs roster?
Long-term, I mean, I'd say from the Domi perspective, probably not much longer than the next number of weeks. I'm a little bit more intrigued about Bertuzzi just because I know this season has been rough at times and certainly hasn't lived up to expectations, but there's still something there. And I think a lot of people have seen those flashes at varying points that, make you a believer. It's just that for whatever reason for this year, it's come in fits and starts. And I think what's interesting about him is that he's going to have a lot of different, things to consider this summer in moving on. Will it be, what kind of fit will I find somewhere else? What will the dollars and term be like? I mean, he's already playing on a short-term deal. Can he get security somewhere else? Or is this a guy that's going to be singing for his paycheck on a night-to-night basis? I think he's in a really intriguing spot for someone that I think has left a lot of his potential on the table this year.
What about Seattle? A lot of people in the chat and producer Vic as well asking about Seattle. Could they make sense? Like, what's your expectation from the Kraken standpoint? A big win for them against the Boston Bruins on Monday night, but they obviously have some defensemen that could make sense for the Maple Leafs too.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that Seattle is really hungry to do much one way or the other in terms of trading off pieces and or trying to add. They're a team that, again, this season has been up and down. Like I think 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I was looking at that team saying, why can't the Kraken be the 8th and final seed in the West? Why can't they be that team that gets the second wild card spot? And yet every time you think that they're going to put it together and put a run together, they kind of have some mitigating circumstance that gets in their way. It kind of feels like last year was a bit of an aberration, a one-hit wonder, a lot of players having career years, that this year they've come back to earth. And now how do you size that up in terms of the overall game plan and what they're looking for in terms of how they build out this expansion franchise on a 5 to 6, 7 year basis? It probably involves a steadying influence and steadying eye. And I think Ron Francis has that. But I don't see them being a huge player one way or the other.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Roseau. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.